Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
I'm excited to be joined today by an actor, author, paranormal researcher, and Greg Lawson is here joining us today to talk about his brand new released book this last week, How to Be a Paranormal Detective. Greg, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show.
And where are you joining us from today?
So I am currently north of Austin in a little town called Georgetown, Texas.
Fantastic. No, we love Austin. We were just there. We interviewed the haunted history guides from the Austin Ghost Tour and spent some time there during South by Southwest. And It's really one of my favorite towns. And funny enough, I was looking at, before we get into the paranormal stuff, I was looking at your acting resume, your CV in the acting world.
Yeah.
You were in the YouTube Red movie Lazer Team.
I was, yeah. I was a CIA agent in that. And, what's great about it is, what's great about having like a speaking role is when they cut it.
Right.
And all you see is my head and me walk through the shot and, working at a computer and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I had this great role of get out. I was telling everybody to get out because the time portal was going to explode. And, they cut all that out. And I must suck.
And it's funny, the reason I know about that movie is because they had a premiere of it in Madison because one of the actors, Jeremy St. James, is from here. He played a character called Bean in the movie, and he's from Madison, the Madison area. And so he used to play in some local bands here in Madison. So that's how I knew him and
Nice.
Actually ran into him randomly at the Amazon party at South by Southwest this year. And he's like, hey, remember me? And I was like too drunk to remember. So I'm like, oh. He's like, because we used to play in bands together. So it's just a funny thing in a small world. So that's just awesome that you've acted in a bunch of different projects, especially in a project with a guy we know. So it just shows how the entire entertainment world and the paranormal world is a pretty small place.
Yeah, it is. And that show, that was the most fun set I've ever been on. I've worked on zombie films or zombie shows. I've worked on, From Dusk Till Dawn, The Sun with AMC with Pierce Brosnan. And the most fun set I've ever been on was Lazer Team. It was hilarious, and the director was just fantastic.
Well, that's ridiculous. We'll put we'll have to put the trailer for that in the show notes so you guys can check it out because it is a lot of fun and it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous.
So, Greg, just a little bit. So, where are you from originally, and how did you get into paranormal stuff? I mean, it's a big step, I think, for a lot of us to come out of the weird closet, because your friends look at you different once you let them know that you're into paranormal stuff. So kind of, what was your moment where you're like, okay, I'm into this, and where are we going to go from here?
I was 5. Okay. So I started a little earlier than a lot. I was born in Kentucky. I don't remember anything about Kentucky. We moved to Louisiana and then to Texas. So when I was 5 years old, my brother was 12 years older than me, and he would put me on his motorcycle. He had a little Triumph motorcycle, and we would go driving around these back, roads of Texas looking for graveyards. That's what he wanted to do. So we'd ride around, we'd look for a graveyard, we'd get off, then we'd walk around, and the kind of game we played was let's find the youngest kid in the graveyard. Right? Because he would then scare me and go, look, this kid's younger than you and he's dead in the ground, and stuff like that.
Right.
So he would torture me. Yeah, he'd torture me. And so we did that. We'd go and look in like abandoned houses and stuff. And how in the world we didn't ever get snake bit or, arrested for criminal trespass or whatever, I don't know. But yeah, so it started there, and him being 17 at the time, by the time I was 8 or 9, he had moved out of the house, and so I just started doing this with my friends. I started, what do y'all want to do on Saturday? I don't know. Let's go to the graveyard, and they're like, what? And so we'd go mess around and just do a lot of urban exploration, rural exploration, and kind of ghost hunting. And I defined a ghost hunter as someone who just goes to a creepy place with no, preconceived notion or investigation of what they're going to find there. And they just go literally hunt weirdness,
right.
And so I kind of did that, and all through high school and up into, when I went into the Army, I did a lot of that, but I started doing more research when I was in the Army because I got to go to some really cool places. I went to, I was stationed up in Alaska. I was in Central America. I was in North Africa. I was in the Middle East. And so, and back then we didn't have the internet, so I could just flip to my phone and go, okay, what's the weird stuff here
right.
in Dubai or, wherever I was. And so you would actually have to figure out where to go to find out information, either historical societies, like when I was up in Alaska, and Kodiak. I spent a lot of time. I was at a school there for about 3 weeks, and I spent a lot of time going to the library and just learning all about, the Russian occupation in Alaska. A lot of people don't know that much about that history, and they did horrific things to the Native Americans up there.
Oh yeah.
And anyway, so I would do that, and so that's kind of led me to where I am.
So you went into the service,
right.
and then you eventually started working in law enforcement?
Right. So I was at the 82nd Airborne Division when I was in the Army, and when I got out, my plan was to come back to Austin and go to school and become I was in a fine arts program, and going to college, and that lasted for about a semester, and I was like, man, I'm really hungry. I really want some food. I need a job.
Right.
And so my sister was working as a court reporter at the courthouse, and she said, well, the sheriff's office is hiring. And so I kind of reluctantly went down there to put in my application, and they hired me because of my service, military service. And so I just kind of became this reluctant cop kind of thing. I feel like I'm a good cop as far as I think I treat people really well. I get taken advantage of sometimes when I do that.
Sure.
But I'm more interested in whether we're doing the right thing than whether I'm making an arrest or getting a statistic or something like that. So as a deputy, I also became a mental health investigator. There's a small unit in most police agencies that's called a critical incident team member or mental health officer. And you end up doing hostage negotiation. You're trained as a hostage negotiator, a suicide mediator, and you get called out on all the people that are having some sort of mental breakdown or psychosis, delusions, or hallucinations or something. And you go out and speak with them. Well, that kind of fit right into my preoccupation of weirdness. And so I learned a ton. I did that for about 2 years. We had about 700 cases a year, and I got to interview scores upon scores of people who, reported that they had been abducted by aliens or had, an experience with a demon or a ghost or something that really was tragic for them, a really high stress situation where, they would have some sort of breakdown in family or friends, or, just the public would see them acting strange and would go in and intervene with them. Because the uniform cops don't want to have anything to do with it. They show up and they're like, oh, this guy's crazy, call mental health. And you go over there and I've gone and talked to people and actually gone and bought them lunch and sat there and just let them tell me their story, and that I know they're not committable or anything. They obviously had either something really traumatic happen to them, or they're mentally ill and they're just delusional about what it happened. But either way, I just kind of was the reporter and collected the story, So that was
well,
cool.
we definitely want to, talk a little bit about how your experience in the armed forces and your experience in law enforcement has now, informed how you investigate paranormal activity or paranormal locations. I mean, and your book is called How to Be a Paranormal Detective. So
right.
we definitely want to get into that. But before we do, was there a certain experience you had like that you can remember as your first time where really was something that you couldn't explain? Now, when we go into research, we've all, read stories or we're going into graveyards and going into haunted places and seen a lot of weird stuff. But it's that first time when you kind of move from like a complete skeptic or whatever to like, oh my God, now I've seen something. Like now I'm one of the people who should be talking to the mental health reporter. So, do you remember the first time you saw something where you're like, oh, I can't explain that. What's that about?
Yeah. And, mine are not as good as a lot of people's stories. Mine, like the number one thing that affected me, I was very young. I was around 5, kind of at the same time
Sure.
that my brother was jacking with me. But this was not him. It could have been him, I guess, but I don't think he could fit underneath the chair in the living room. And what I mean by that is I went to sleep and I had this really bad dream, and I woke up and I had to go to the bathroom. And I remember this pretty well. Being 5, your memory is a little weird, but I remember it pretty well.
Right. You can really remember images and stuff. I mean, well, like you.
Yeah, I've been back to the house that this happened in as an adult and walked through it, and that's exactly how I remember the house. So that's one of the things I wanted to check is, has my memory morphed at all, by not thinking about it for a year, and then you try to recall it, and your brain naturally tries to fill in the gaps. And a lot of people are a little skeptical of me saying that, but all you have to do is go and do any kind of like visual like visual test online. You can go and look at some of this stuff, and your brain will fill in the gaps where, let's say there's a bunch of squares and there's circles between each square. Well, there's not actually circles. It's just a white dot. But as your eye scans around, that white dot turns black because it's filling in what it thinks should be there. And so a lot of times in memory, if it's rote memory, in other words, just memorization, and it's not like an episodic memory or, a big event kind of thing like 9/11 or the Challenger explosion or something like that. If it's someplace in between, your brain will fill in those gaps and make the story make sense.
That's absolutely right. I've got a good friend who used to work with Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, who she was on the board of SciCop, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. So she is one of those debunkers. But my friend was working with her, and my friend has a very open mind. But she did, work on the research where they were looking at, not necessarily, implanted memories, and not implanted in a Manchurian candidate kind of way, but implanted in that you would, just doing research and suggest a story to somebody where they, be like, hey, remember when we were kids and you did this? And they'd be like, no, I don't remember. And then you'd let it simmer for a while. And then eventually they'd be like, hey, remember we did this when we were kids? And it would be something that never happened. And because, we can do that, our minds will do that.
Yeah, parents do that a lot, and especially children who are abused, they will fill in and go over and over and over again, something else or that they're not abused or whatever. But yeah, and I'm not a debunker, but if it's not paranormal, it's not paranormal. Let's just say it the way it is. It's not. I can't prove that, that your memory changed over time, but there's enough scientific data out there, and there's enough research to say that yes, that is the fact that it does happen. But and I want to clarify something. As far as there's a lot of people out there that talk that they are skeptics and they're debunkers, right? To be a detective, to be an investigator, is to be skeptic. It's not to be cynic, and it's not to be gullible. You have to be a skeptic on the information that you receive, whether it's testimonial information or hard evidence, physical evidence, or circumstantial evidence. You have to be skeptical about whether that makes sense. You look at something and you go, does it make sense that this would be here? In other words, let's say somebody is in a house and they see a full-bodied apparition with a cell phone in their hand, walking through the house crying, let's say.
Okay.
You go, okay, well, that's, some sort of ghost, something really bad happened. It's maybe it's some sort of psychic impression. Maybe it's some sort of time warp thing that we're seeing through or whatever. But the question is does that apparition make sense to where you are and when you are there? And so you do the research, you find out, well, this house is only 15 years old. It's only been here for 15 years, and it was the land was owned by a goat farmer prior to that for 40 years. And he got it from his father, who had it for 40 years. And then prior to that, it was a Spanish plat, and then prior to that, the Indians roamed around on it. So you look and you go, okay, let's research any 911 calls. Did somebody come here? Did anybody else live in the house that would, resemble this image? You go through all this, and does it make any sense? And when you come up with nothing, well, then you got nothing. That's just, you don't have anything.
Right.
And so you're not gullible going, oh yeah, let's get out our K2 meter. Let's get out our spirit box. Let's get on our phone. And, cause they're on their phone, they're walking around with their phone. Let's see if we can make contact with them. And maybe you can, maybe it's a spatial displacement and they're there instead of where they're supposed to be.
Sure.
I can keep making up stuff all day long of why this thing is there, but it's my job as a paranormal, I'm using air quotes, paranormal detective,
right? Not
a ghost hunter and not a paranormal investigator. I'm a paranormal detective. I use above and beyond what everybody else is using, including forensic interview techniques through, written statements or previous statements, newspaper articles, whatever. And so I try to make sense out of it. And if I can't make sense out of it, I just shrug my shoulders and go, yeah, man, I don't know what to do with this. If I debunk it along the way, then I have to tell you, yeah, no, this is what it really is. But you have the debunkers that have hijacked the word skeptic. They're not skeptics. They're cynics. When you say, hey, I had this experience, they're going to roll their eyes and then sit there and listen to you and then go, you're full of crap.
Well, that's a great point. The idea that the difference between a debunker and a skeptic, it's like, okay, we have to figure out if this story makes sense or not. A debunker's job is to say, like, this is why your story's not true. I mean, it's how you start in the offset. That's not a way to find the truth. That's a way to prove a point.
Exactly. That's perfect. I'm going to steal that statement.
Please do.
Yeah, there's no better way to explain it.
When you're talking about your first experience and what you were saying, so let's go down that. So, okay, you're back in the house where something happened, and tell us what happened, and then tell us how you would try to detect it. A little bit, like how you would go through and be like, all right, well, let's see if this experience has something to it.
Yeah, because I was 5, I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Right.
But so what happened was I had this dream, and and this makes no sense, but this is the only way that I can explain it to you, is the blonde lady was coming to get me. That was my dream experience. Like this.
I've had a few dreams like that, but they weren't that scary.
Yeah, well, that's another story. But this was more along the lines of a old hag syndrome kind of thing. She was, I couldn't move, and she's staring at me and all that stuff. So anyway, I wake up, I'm freaked out. I got to go to the bathroom. So I get up and I have to go out of my room, take a right and walk down the hall, go through the little living room to the bathroom because I'm on one side of the house. And as I'm going through the living room, hands start coming out from underneath the couch and grabbing a hold of me.
Oh man.
And I'm kicking them, and finally get back to my room and get under the covers, and that's the end of my story. So as far as detecting that, I mean, there's no way for me to even go back and recreate, obviously, because it's somebody else's house now. It's been somebody else's house it's been several people's houses since then. But that was one of the things that really, you know, as a 5-year-old, and you have that, it was really, really vivid. It wasn't like a regular dream. It was vivid. It was like a real experience. And I assume, being an adult and being a guy that was going to get his degree in psychology,
right,
and went through everything all the way through his BA until statistical analysis for behavioral sciences. And I went, I don't want to do this because I don't want to hear your problems. Like that. No, I'm not going to sit here and listen to people whine and complain all day long. And no. So I changed my degree. But with that background, I can convince my adult self that there was nothing to that. That was a dream, and there's nothing to it. Just like any other quote unquote adult will tell children, there's no such thing as monsters. There's no such thing as ghosts. Go back to sleep. But tomorrow morning when we go to church, we're going to pray to, you know,
right.
And they believe in the supernatural, but they don't believe in the paranormal. And so there's kind of a line in the sand there. So that was one of them. And then another one that was just kind of completely out of the blue. I was 16 years old working at Pizza Hut. I was assistant manager at 16. All you people that are listening, don't be haters. You know, some of us are just talented that way. So I was assistant manager at Pizza Hut at 16, and I'm standing between the ovens and the prep table. And I had hired this girl about a couple of weeks prior to this incident happening. She was like 20, 21 years old, really pretty. So, you know, obviously she'd make a great waitress.
Right.
In my 16-year-old mind, you know.
Of course.
And so she's got her notepad in one hand and a pen in the other, and she's walking toward me from the dining area past the cashier area, the cash register, walking up to me, and her eyes are huge, and she has this absolutely terrified look on her face, right? And she walks up to me, and this is pre-Poltergeist, so she didn't get the line from the movie. Right. She walks up and she takes a hold of my hand and then just says really loudly, and I won't do it here, but really loudly, "They're here," like that, and then just locks up like a piece of concrete, just locks up like a board, right?
Oh, man.
Completely stiff. Completely catatonic. Her eyes are just fixed, looking straight at me. Kind of, when I move around, they wouldn't move. You know, she's just stuck there, right? And so I'm trying to get her to come with me and come to the back of the restaurant, and she won't move at all. And I look down, and she has urinated on herself.
Holy crap!
Yeah, and so I don't know what to do. You know, being 16 years old, so I just kind of hang on to her hands and you know, try to talk, come on to the back. And finally she starts relaxing a little bit, and she starts walking to the back with me. And as we get to the back, I sit her down, she sits down, and I go back out to the front to clean up, you know, her accident. And I go back and talk to her, and she said, yeah, it happens all the time. It's been happening since she was a little kid. The aliens come and abduct her, take her to the spaceship, do these horrific experiments on her, and then return her to her body. And that, you know, for my 16-year-old mind to wrap around it, yeah, was like, oh, okay, but you were here. She goes, yeah, but they take me in some other way, and they do these things to me, right?
Now, what time of night was it? Was this like after? Was this when you guys were cleaning up? Was this like during?
No, this is
customers.
This is during. Yeah, there's customers there, and they saw, you know, some people that were there at the cash register checking out saw her, you know, and saw what happened.
Right.
And so, she worked there for, you know, for a couple of more weeks and had another episode like that. And I called the general manager because our manager had quit, and that's why I was assistant manager, just because we didn't have a manager. And so, the general manager came over and he said, "Look, send her up to the hospital and have them look at her. We'll pay for her. The Pizza Hut will pay for the bill." And so she went up to the hospital, and they ended up giving her an MRI, and she had a big scar on her brain. Right, which I didn't know then, but it was in the middle of her brain, and I know now that that's the corpus callosum. It's the thing that connects the right and left hand side of your brain.
Right.
And those neurons in there don't have what's called a myelin sheath. It's like a protective sheath for your nerve, and the corpus callosum doesn't have that, and is subject to damage for all kinds of different reasons. The women that are listening will like this. Men's brains are damaged more than women's because of testosterone. It kills the corpus callosum between the right and left-hand side of the brain. That's why men aren't really good at multitasking, and we kind of think about things in one particular linear way because we got brain damage to deal with it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and so she had this big scar, right? And they immediately diagnosed her as epileptic and, put her on medication. That's it. It's over. All right. She's not, epileptic. But my question is, and all of us rational thinking people can sit back and go, I know the answer to this question. But my question is, did the scar on her brain cause the epilepsy, or did the epilepsy cause the scar, or did what the aliens did to her caused the scar to project itself as epilepsy, and rational people will sit back and go, okay, what's the most likely scenario of this? What's the largest amount of physical evidence, not testimonial, not anecdotal, but physical evidence and data? She's an epileptic. Something happened to her as a child, caused this scar, and it causes this neural interruption, or, to make these things happen to her. But, throw inductive reasoning in there a little bit and go, well, there's a lot of anecdotal, a lot of testimonial evidence that people get abducted and that there are visitors from other planets coming and manipulating and messing with humans. This would be, a good example of that, I guess.
A great way to cover it up, too.
Sure.
What I think that story's fascinating is that, I've met a lot of people who will do some crazy things for attention. I mean, I'm a musician, so I'm very used to other people doing wild stuff because they want people to pay attention to them.
Sure.
But the wetting your pants is farther than almost anybody will go. Like that's an on with the show thing where you're like, across, I draw the line. And
right.
And so that kind of thing is like, holy, like that, some kind of seizure. It's something. And then you wonder if there's areas of her brain that are talking that, her, like with schizophrenia, where people don't recognize that it's their own brain talking to them and think it's coming from outside their head. You think that if she's having damage and, parts of the brain can't talk to each other, does it feel like aliens are taking over her mind? Does it feel like a paranormal experience? Because it feels like there is something non-physical taking over her mind and causing these seizures to happen. And even if it's not a completely paranormal experience, it's still terrifying to have that your own body is betraying you and you can't control it.
Right. And most people take for granted what they see. They go, okay, this is my world. I'm sitting here at my desk. I'm looking across. I see papers. I see books. I see, my shelves and stuff. And I go, okay, that's real to me. Well, no, it's not. And just live with me here for just a second.
Sure.
I don't see that. That is not what I am seeing. That is my brain's interpretation of what I believe is there. Okay. Because your eyes are not lenses to the world. They're not letting in this picture and shining it up on a wall someplace where you're watching it like a movie. Your eyes are literally just receptors, and they're picking up the electromagnetic spectrum and the visual, realm, and just the colors that we can see, which there's a whole lot of other spectrum out there that we can't see, right. Ultraviolet, infrared, microwave, all that stuff. It's all the same stuff. It's just at different wavelengths. So we have this little visual wavelength that we can see that's very small. And these receptors in our eyes pick them up, turn it into chemical and electronic pulses, send them back to the back of your brain. The back of your brain receives it and then has to recreate what you see. And we assume what we see is true. And then when you add in what you just said as far as schizophrenia, if you have some sort of disruption between different parts of the brain, and there's information being fed into that area, that your visual stimulus is coming into, and you get a little extra fed into that area, then that's when you see the pink elephant walk through the room, or, whatever other visuals,
right.
Hallucination that you might have. And it's really funny talking to people that don't study it or don't understand it. And they're just like, well, yeah, can't you tell the difference? It's a pink elephant. There's no such thing as a pink elephant. Well, dude, I'm telling you, if you have schizophrenia and you see a pink elephant, it's really there. You believe it's there. It is there for you.
Because there is no difference. There is no difference in between in between what your eyes see, the information, because it's all just being processed by your brain, and it's like somebody putting something extra in the programming. I mean, that's why when people take, psilocybin and stuff like that, their surroundings haven't changed. People, they take a trip from their couch or whatever, and
right.
Have delusions or hallucinations, and it's just as real in their brain as looking at your shelves and looking at the lamp, and I'm looking at a picture of you right now. Right? And so
maybe you are.
and that's the thing. And so that's a great way to put it. We have to think about the way people see things and the way visual information is processed. Because, that goes back to seeing is believing. Can you believe everything you see? And, someone would say, because hallucinations exist, we have to think, we always have to question, what people see and figure out, what it could be. One of the things I'm wondering about, in your career in talking to people, in investigating and having to interview, hundreds of people probably in the mental health capacity as well as the law enforcement capacity. Did you ever have something where you talk to them and you're like, oh my God, this might be like a paranormal case or something like this, or this isn't for the police. We got to call in an exorcist or something?
So no, I've never called in an exorcist, but I have. So we walk a very thin line in the United States as far as how we exercise Fourth Amendment protection. And so, in other words, if a person's not a danger to themselves or others, and they're not experiencing severe psychosis or deterioration, then we leave them alone. In other words, that's why you see how many street people there are now. The Dehospitalization Act back in 1984 kicked a bunch of people out of the state hospitals because while they're mentally ill, they're not a danger to themselves or others.
Right. And the Fourth Amendment is about, you can't do just random search and seizures. It can't be like the British government where soldiers, in the Revolutionary War, the soldiers would come in and just take stuff. The British soldiers would come in and take stuff from the colonials. And that's the whole reason we have a Fourth Amendment, so that police officers and army guys can't just walk in and be like, give me your guns or whatever. That's
right. And, many law enforcement agencies in the United States require a GED for your police officers. They have a GED and they go through their police academy and then they're a cop. And it's amazing because they have the authority to take an American citizen's rights away from them and incarcerate them, detain them. But you have to do it correctly under the Fourth Amendment.
Absolutely.
So, in doing some of the I'd say, let's say you get to an intervention part where you get called and there's a whole bunch of religious people there and they're all praying and they're saying that, this individual is possessed by demons and everything. And I go do my investigation, go, okay, they're not in danger to themselves or not an immediate in danger to themselves or others. And I don't have their history. They don't have a history of psychosis or anything like that. Will they benefit from treatment? And they firmly believe that they're possessed. At that point, I'll ask them to come with me for a voluntary examination. If they don't go, well, I'm not going to take them. They have friends and family there that are taking care of them. They're going to exercise it, and I'm out. Because in that capacity, we really have to be very careful about not stepping over into the paranormal world, because everybody needs to stay in their lane. Everybody has a job to do, and if everybody would just do their own job and quit complaining about everybody not doing, everybody else not doing theirs, we would get a lot more stuff done. And so I try to stay in my lane depending on what my role is. So yeah, I've been to a lot of those, and I was raised Catholic, so I jokingly say I'm a recovering Catholic, but I'll always be that way. I'll always believe that there is something else. I just don't believe certain things. They don't make sense to me. And when you study history, you go, oh yeah, I would have made up that rule too. To control the population. That's what I would have said. So yeah. And just being an investigator, when you're doing stuff like that and you're showing up, you have to be a skeptic. You have to have unregulated suspicion. You have to have morbid curiosity. You have to have those types of things to try to figure this out, and not just go, oh, there's a ghost here. All right, where's my K2 meter? Let me get my spirit box out. Let's start talking. And that's fine if you want to do that. And if you want to go ghost hunting, that's fine. If you want to go run around in weird places, drinking beer and having a good time and not damaging or committing any crimes, that's fine.
Right.
But if you want to be taken seriously, maybe as an investigator, you should take a 40-hour class on how to interview somebody. It's like, well, what's there to interviewing somebody? Is who, what, when, where, why, and how. How hard is that? Well, to get the information properly out of people and not lead them, not groom them into saying what you want them to say, there's a lot to it. That's why, cops for who, what, when, where, why, and how, that's 40 hours of training. And then if you want to do, a statement, to take a statement, that's another 40 hours of training. And then if you want to do statement analysis, that's another 80 hours of training. Then if you want to go through the read technique, that could be up to 4 weeks of training on how to interrogate, cross-examine, and properly interview a person who's being deceptive. So there's a whole lot to it. And I'm not faulting anybody, so don't get all offended.
Right.
But most people don't have any of that training. And that is the investigation, is getting the proper information from folks. I read books all the time. I read a book the other day. They had interviewed over 700 people in this one case. Well, I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, well, about 30 people out of the 700 know anything about it.
Right.
The rest of them were just, knew somebody who knew somebody or saw something go through town that looked like it might have been something to have to do with something. And it was just like, okay, quality versus quantity, right? Qualitative approach or quantitative approach. Is more witnesses that weren't really there that you interviewed that has anecdotal evidence or, read something about something that somebody said, and then they relay it to you? Or do you want that 2 or 3 people that were really there and concentrate on them, do regressive therapy on, do whatever you need to do to really try to get that information out?
Well, I think it's interesting, you're talking about this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I know that you have done a bunch of interviews for the Roswell UFO crash, and you've done interviews for like Don Schmidt, and we just had Don on to talk about the passing of Stanton Friedman. I talked about his memories of Stanton and their friendly rivalry and things like that in trying to get to the truth in Roswell. So, when you're going through and doing these interviews and getting, I mean, is this one of the reasons that you decided to write How to Be a Paranormal Detective, to help people in their research and investigation so that we can get, more reliable interviews from people?
Absolutely. When I first got into like the paranormal community, officially, I really didn't realize there was that many people. I wasn't watching the TV shows and stuff. And I wrote a book called Zombie Advocacy. And it was a satirical book that nobody bought because nobody wants to advocate for them. They all want to shoot them in the head. So it was pretty much the end of my book there. I think they ran 2,500 copies and went, "Yeah, sorry, Mr. Lawson, you suck. we're not gonna run this book anymore." So anyway, I got a call from some folks down in New Orleans, and they said, "Hey," or I didn't get a call. I got an email.
Sure.
Said, "Are you the zombie advocacy guy?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Well, do you ever talk at conventions?" I'm like, "Sure." I had spoken at several law enforcement conventions, but not any of the paranormal stuff. And they said, "Well, we'd like for you to come down and do a 1-hour presentation on zombies." And I said, "Okay." And so they paid me a little bit of money, flew me over there, and got there, and they were real voodoo priestess and stuff.
Oh, man.
I was like, "Whoa, wait a second, no. This is like Walking Dead zombie. This is like not like
Serpent and the Rainbow Zombie."
Yeah. And so I went in there and I turned it into a comedy shtick is what I did, because I was like, I hope they don't kill me. I hope they don't put a curse on me or something for tricking them. But it was great. I still communicate with a couple of the folks that were there. They were really cool about it. They thought it was funny, that they were like, "Oh, we thought you were some sort of special guy with your master's in education." And I'm like, "No, I'm a goof with a master's of education." And just, I just wrote the book because I see so many zombies every day. And so I think that we have to look behind the curtain. I think that we have to try to figure out and not take things for face value. And,
Sure.
and Don Schmidt. So I think I have written someplace, or I've said someplace, that I have done interviews for Don Schmidt and Tom Carey. And I actually, if you want to be technical about it, I did it for Tom Carey.
Okay.
Although it was when Tom Carey and Don Schmidt were collaborating on things.
Right. We just know Don better because we live in Wisconsin.
And Don's great, man. I love Don. He has done. Stan Freeman did a lot of work on Roswell, but in my opinion, Don has done more intensive work, more, out talking to people, just going through all. Those guys have covered that as good as you can get it. The only other thing that they're missing is a damn spaceship and maybe an alien or two, because
Right, the physical proof.
there's no rocks they haven't turned over. They've done what they can do at this point. And if it was not just some sort of government cover up for the, atomic race, or the, some sort of special project or something like that, and if it was a vehicle that came from another place, either another time or another place, traveled all the way here, crashed, what else are you going to do? Those guys, and their books are great. And I can't even imagine following up with what do you do next, other than
Right.
somehow find the spaceship.
That's the big one. It's awesome that you've been involved in, a whole bunch of different kinds of investigations and got to use the talents that you developed, as a law enforcement officer, and interviewing all those people into, moving them into the, just talking to people with paranormal experiences and trying to get behind that the best they can. I was wondering, is there any particular case that, you feel you've worked on and interviewed people about and talked, and you're thinking like, this is the most convincing one that I have, that there's something else out there that we don't understand? Because there's stuff that's easily debunkable or, easily to be a skeptic about. Like we talk about what happened, a terrifying thing that happened at Pizza Hut. Like, if that happened to me, I'd be like, oh my God, like, and so when things like that happen, you're like, okay, well, she did have a scar in her corpus callosum. She was, diagnosed as an epileptic. And in your research and your investigations, there's some people you've talked to or things you've seen where you're like, you know what, I've gone through every kind of debunking thing here, and I can't figure out, what it is.
So I've a lot of the places that I go, probably a majority of the places I go by myself. So when I was up in Alaska, I went to some really amazing places up there and had my own experiences, whatever. And they were typically more of a metaphysical type experience. And I've been to Corvin Castle or Hunadora Castle over in Romania. And, Vlad the Impaler was there, and I'm walking around in there by myself in the middle of the night. I've been to Warwick Castle in England and, some of these other, Lep Castle in Ireland. I didn't spend very much time at Lep, but I didn't have any real prominent experiences at some of the famous places. It seems like I have some more of my kind of weirdness at, like random little places, different places. But like I said, if there's a whole bunch of people around, I've been around a whole bunch of ghost hunters before and had some interesting things happen, like on a spirit box. It says some things that correlate to what we're doing. And it's like, how in the hell? I start doing a statistical, think, what's the likelihood of that spirit box saying that right now? When you say, who just walked in the room and the spirit box says Ryan, and it was Ryan that just walked in the room. How did that happen?
Right.
That's pretty crazy. But so one of my investigations last year, a lady up in Merrill Wells called me up and said that she had just bought what's called Haunted Hill House up in Merrill Wells. And she asked that if I would come up and investigate it and try to figure out what's going on. And I agreed, but my agreeing to it is you have to give me the house for 24 hours and not have, no one else on property, just
right.
me. And so she agreed to it. So I went up there and I do the stuff that other paranormal investigators don't do. And I'm hoping that they will do sometime. If they read my book, they might do it. There's a whole bunch of holes that paranormal investigators leave. For instance, when's the last time you've seen a paranormal investigator using a metal detector at a site?
Everybody has a K2, but I have not seen a metal detector.
No metal detector. Yeah. Okay, check this out. So I go up to this house and they have this big, long anecdotal history of what the house was. The house was a brothel. It was a place where they shipped booze, moonshine, and did bootlegging out of there for a hotel that's right beside it. It's a pretty amazing place. And so if the rich people that were at the hotel wanted to go and get a prostitute, well, they would go over to Hill House, and that was the brothel, right? So they have this big, long history about all this and all the girls that work there and this stuff. And a child that died upstairs and et cetera, et cetera. I can go on, right?
Sure. Those are all very common stories of places. I mean,
sure.
the whole booze during Prohibition, the brothel,
yep.
the kid who died upstairs. Sometimes they'll say the kid's like a prostitute's son or something like that.
It is. Yep.
Right. I feel like there is this entire layer of urban myths and stories that go along with any of these places that have experiences that have, maybe hauntings and stuff like that from a certain era. They seem to all be there. So I'm with you on this.
Yep. Crybaby Bridge. When I was a kid, we had Crybaby Bridge in Rockdale, and you would walk across it and you could hear a child crying somewhere in the water down there. Well, it's a riveted bridge, and when you adjust weight on it, It sounds like it's,
Right.
it sounds like a baby crying. So there's crybaby bridges all over the United States, and I thought it was just in Rockdale. Well, in this case, so I'm looking at them like, all right, so how am I going to approach this? I go in and I shut the power off to the whole house. No electricity in the house. I take a K2 meter. I go through there, and I try to identify any other residual electrical, spots in the house that I can pick up. I have a wall stud finder. I do all kinds of stuff with the, and try to eliminate things. So I did 4 years Army, right, as an infantry parachutist. I did 4 years Navy as an operations specialist, and I did 2 years Air Force as security force protector. And so from my Air Force training, I know how to secure a building.
Sure.
There are certain ways that you can do it, and you're going to know whether somebody came in or whether they breached an area or whatever it is. So I know how to make sure nobody sneaks in on me, right? And so I set up my little countermeasures in the house, and I set up video and audio in the house, which I use, GoPros and old analog tape video, and also digital and analog audio, right? So I set up my own stuff. I don't use their stuff that's already set up. And then I'll let the house cook for a little while. I leave, and I go and I metal detect the back. Well, I find a folding knife from it looked like the 1930s, old folding knife.
Sure.
I found a girl's earring. I found a girl's bracelet. And so I'm like, all right, well, there's things here. I need to get somebody in here. Like I said, I stay in my lane, right? So I need to get somebody in here that I trust that is a really good metal detector. So I went and I got underneath the house. I went under the house, and there's all these weird like runes drawn underneath the house, right?
Okay.
Which could have been just some kids messing around down there, or could be something else. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And so I looked at a couple of things that they talked to me about, and it's very, very compelling. Well, I stay the whole night, and I have 3 experiences in the house. I have one where a door opened on me twice, and there's no way in hell that door should have opened. I debunked if they had an automatic opener on it. I debunked, wind. You debunked that the latch wasn't catching properly, and it's just bizarre. And when I was going down the stairs, I was upstairs about 2:00 in the morning. I'm going down the stairs. I get hit in the neck with a rock. And when I go to try that, the rock hits me in the neck. It falls on the stairs. It bounces, a couple of times. And I'm looking around. I look around for what could have happened. I kind of debunked that they have a pygmy with a blow dart in the wall trying to get me. I look for everything. Then I go back down the stairs and I can't find the rock either. Now, one of the anecdotal stories was that the little boy that died upstairs will throw rocks. So I find it very interesting that happened. I got a really good adrenaline dump out of it at 2:00 in the morning by myself.
So there was no place there wasn't just a whole bunch of rocks on from people. People brought in on the side of the stairs. People might have brought in with their shoes or something like that. It wasn't.
No, sir.
And so that's something amazing.
I spent about an hour there. So about 4:00 in the morning, I'm going back upstairs because every hour I collect my video and audio, and I go into the kitchen and I download it onto my laptop and I replace it with other video and audio, right? So I'm going to go back upstairs and replace the video and audio upstairs. And I start walking up the stairs. I get about halfway, and a ball of light comes out of the kitchen and goes out the front door, out of the corner of my eye. I'm looking up the stairs, which is really dark. I didn't, like I said, I powered down the house, so I just had my little handheld light. And this light comes out of the kitchen in the corner of my eye, and as I look for it, as I turn to look for it, it zooms out the front door. And I get a great adrenaline dump out of that. That was
Right,
awesome.
of
I'm like,
course.
oh my God, I love that, you know? And so anyway, I do my investigation, and I leave the next day. I do my research. Yes, a little boy who had Down syndrome actually died in the house.
Huh.
So we got that. I don't know whether he died upstairs or not, but I know that, you know, that they have a historical record as far as a death certificate coming from that. He was the child of one of the tenants of the house, which that could be a tenant or that could have been a prostitute,
Sure.
because it would have been about the same time they saved some prostitute, you know, that they were running a brothel there. A few weeks later, the friend of mine, her name is Gypsy Jewel. You can find her at zerodiscrimination.com, I think. And so I asked her to go out and work it as far as metal detecting, right? She went out and she found all kinds of stuff. And the cool thing that she found was condom containers. Back in the old days, they were like the lambskin, reusable. You wash them out.
Oh, sure.
And they come in a little metal, it's like a snuff case, right? Like a little snuff tin.
Huh.
Yeah, she found those on property and you know, old bottles on property. So that would lead you to believe, okay, there possibly could have been some activity there. You know, you say there's a brothel there in the 1930s, and then you find bottles from the 1930s, and you find condoms.
Right.
You know,
That there's something to that one.
1930s. So yeah, you know, you got a little bit of supportive evidence that this is happening. You don't have any supportive evidence from police reports because the police reports were supporting the brothel. You know,
Right.
so that's always the inductive reasoning of, oh, the reason that we don't have police reports is because the police were, you know, bad. They were in cahoots with you know, the booze smugglers and the prostitutes. So that's always a great answer to it. So you go through all that, and so that's a case that I'm still working on, because for me, there's a lot more to it. Also, there was a girl that was murdered up in Mineral Wells about 10, 11, 12 years ago. And there was some testimonial evidence that she had been at that house previously to being murdered. And so some people have a belief that folding knife that I found is actually the victim girl who was murdered's father's knife.
Oh.
And so I don't know whether that's true or not,
Sure.
but I find that it's just all this circumstantial stuff, and you got a little bit of physical evidence, and that kind of supports what possibly maybe could have happened. But you know what they say in human resources or whatever, it's like, okay, if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Right.
Well, no, it did happen. You know, just because you don't write it down doesn't mean, you know, an event didn't happen. For an administrative hearing, maybe that's true, but in real life, no. And just because you didn't document it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But anyway, you know, you go through evidence, you go through things like that, and you try to figure out, well, you know, does it make sense why something would be there? You look at the location. You know, they're saying it was a brothel. You look at the events and say, okay, there would be sexual activity, and I got condom wrappers or cases. And then, you know, then would the explanation of the paranormal event, or, you know, whatever the phenomena is that happens, does that make sense that it would happen there? And then bottom line, you have to make a decision sooner or later. It's either founded, yeah, you know, these events would lead a reasonable person to believe a paranormal event occurred, or it's unfounded because you've debunked it. You know, the cause of the event is something naturally occurring, like I told you about the ball of light that came out
Right.
of the kitchen and went out the front door. 3 weeks later, I had that happen to me in my house multiple times. I called my wife. She's a para-optometric. She works for an optometrist. And I said, I have this experience. She goes, you need to get in and see, we have to look at your eye. So they went in and they looked at my optic nerve. Everything was okay, but they diagnosed me with having a migraine that happens in your eye, and it causes light flashes. So ophthalmic migraine is what it's called. And so you're getting these light flashes, and it can everything from dehydration, which it was Texas in August, and it's 110 degrees outside. So dehydration could have brought it on. My age could have brought it on. All these different things. So you have to go, okay, well, the ball of light happened to me there, and then it happens to me at home. I go to the doctor. The doctor says I'm having ophthalmic migraines. I have some spasms in there, and so I have to debunk the ball of light, which I did not want to do.
Right, of course not, because that's great.
I wanted that to be my, my really hardcore paranormal experience, that the spirit was, leaving out of the house or something.
Running out.
And no. So anyway, it's either founded, it's unfounded, or like most of them, it's undetermined. So there's only three events the only three conclusions you can come to.
Sure.
Is founded, unfounded, or undetermined. And undetermined is just going to be, you lack the physical evidence to, prove a way to make a determination. In other words, while the Roswell, everybody will agree that the government lied to us at Roswell, the investigation was handled badly,
right,
was not documented. And then 30 years go by, people forget about it, and it gets on the news, or not the news, but it gets on TV. People start calling in, people are asking questions, people start coming forward with their story of the event, and it's all conjured up again. But bottom line, they conjured it up, get all this great, information, but we still don't have any of the pieces that were recovered, because they're either in a storage facility someplace or they were destroyed. We don't have a spaceship or
right.
alien. So that people will say, no, with the amount of witnesses we've had come forward, with the amount of circumstantial evidence we have, testimonial evidence we have, they use that word testimonial evidence to make it sound stronger than just a victim or witness statement. I have testimonial. What sounds better? I have testimonial evidence, or I have a witness statement.
Right. Of course.
So they use these words to make it sound stronger. And they say, well, if I would have taken all this to a grand jury would indict. They would say, yes, there was a spaceship crash here. And I don't know about that. I've worked homicide cases before that the suspects tell you so many lies that at a certain point, you don't know what's true or what's not.
Sure.
It's so convoluted that you don't know your, up from down. That the person was murdered, and who did it, but you don't know how it was actually accomplished.
Well, that's what I love about, what you were just talking about in your investigation technique. First of all, you started with something, securing the house. You turned off the power. You did those things, and you have a system going in and doing it. And so a system for investigation also includes a system for interviewing people in order to get the best information you can get out of them. And it sounds like a great start for people will be to read How to Be a Paranormal Detective, which is now available. And you guys can check that out. There'll be links in the show notes. This is going to be othersidepodcast.com/250 is where you can find the show notes and the links to How to Be a Paranormal Detective, just released. And you can grab it on Amazon, and then you can go through. It's forwards by Jeff Belanger. He's a friend of the show, has been on, and he's obviously an awesome storyteller. And you can have a chance to read Greg's book and learn some of these techniques that he's learned in decades of being a criminal investigator. And you can bring some of that into paranormal investigation, and hopefully get a kid to throw rocks at you sometime. That's a great story. And I also have links to your website, and you got a video from Hill House on there. and people can check that out there. So, Greg, I want to thank you for spending some time this morning. You have any upcoming events where people can see you?
The only event that I have scheduled, I did 27 events last year, and I'm
Holy
like,
cow.
I'm never going to do that again. So this year I'm doing 12, and the next one that's coming up is Michigan. So I'll be in Sault Ste. Marie at the Quaid Casino, and it's going to be awesome. It's as far as I'm concerned, that's the best event in the nation.
I think it's one of the top ones. We've been there the past couple of years and had an awesome time. And then you guys will have a chance to meet all of us at Michigan Paragon 10, August 22nd to 24th. It is an awesome event. And you can pick up a copy of How to Be a Paranormal Detective there, and you can ask Greg some questions in person. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, sir.
The story from the interview that probably affected me the most was the one Greg told about his Pizza Hut assistant manager days before he was a paranormal detective. And that was the one where he had that girl employee that had a seizure right after saying, "They're here." It fascinated and terrified me, and we decided to use that energy as inspiration for this episode's song, The Captured Soul.
Outside the atmosphere, there's no escaping, hallucinating. You can't run from your fate inside your mind. A prisoner locked in, trapped and forgotten. The captured soul with a body left behind. You can feel the unreal, your brain a spinning wheel. You know they're there, but you can't reveal. Immobilized, paralyzed, delusional and hypnotized. There's no one you can beg not to appeal. There's no escaping, hallucinating. You can't run from your fate inside your mind. A prisoner locked in, trapped and forgotten. A captured soul with a body left behind.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at OthersidePodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
You know, we just hung out with our Patreon community last night and had a really great time talking about horror movies, the new New York Times story that the Department of Defense and the Air Force is studying UFOs, except they're calling them UAPs. And we just had a lot of fun chatting with everybody about our favorite paranormal topics and horror movies and stuff like that. And we'd love to do that with you. If you're enjoying the podcast and the songs and everything else we put together, then please check out our Patreon community at OthersidePodcast.com/donate. And of course, every single episode we shout out to our Patreon, Dr. Ned. Dr. Ned's at the level where he gets a shout out in every single episode. And we'd love to shout you out too. So please check out the site, OthersidePodcast.com/donate. Wetting your pants is farther than almost anybody will go. Like that's an on with the show thing where you're like, across, I draw the line. Oh, I can't explain that. What's that about?